Welcome to another edition of the Album of Record podcast. I'm your host, Craig Lindell. With me, as always, Andrew Schnicke. How's it going, Andrew?
This Ohio weather is killing me, man. Absolutely killing me.
Windstorms and snow and
Like shorts and a t-shirt 2 days ago, freezing cold now. It just messes with my sinuses. But otherwise, I mean, I know people aren't tuning in to listen to us talk about the weather, but
no.
I'm a little raspy today, but we'll get through it.
Yeah, I'm really excited for today's episode. We've got kind of a gimmick that we've been talking about doing, and we're going to do it today. So here's the idea. Your entire lifetime, you had favorite bands. And so imagine that you're a wrestling fan, and at any one point in time, somebody held the belt. Like Hulk Hogan or The Rock or Stone Cold might be your favorite wrestler of all time. But at different points of time, somebody wins the Royal Rumble and they hold the belt for a while, even if just for a moment. So we're taking that concept to bands, and Andrew and I are going to go through our top 5 bands, not including Pearl Jam, that have ever held the belt, have ever been our favorite band at any one point in time. Andrew.
I admit I am not the world's biggest wrestling fan. I watched for a while when I was in high school. So I don't know, like, in my mind, Hulk Hogan is like the guy from wrestling still, but is there somebody who is like the undisputed, like who's held the belt the longest? Do you have any idea?
I don't have any idea, but in terms of like fame, you've got Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, Macho Man, The Rock, Stone Cold, John Cena, and then after that, I really have no idea. But like anybody who ever was in a major motion picture who was also in wrestling, I think they count as being one of the most famous of all time.
Yeah. So I think, like, for me, like, I'll just stick with Hulk Hogan as the one that when I was growing up was the guy. So, like, that's Pearl Jam. Pearl Jam is my Hulk Hogan. Like, they might temporarily, somebody else might get that belt, but they tend to get it back. In all seriousness, like, yes, if somebody asks me today, who's your favorite band? Without hesitation, the answer is Pearl Jam. At this point, after having been a fan for 30 plus years now, that's probably never going to change that answer. But there certainly are bands that in different eras and moments that I have listened to more than Pearl Jam and felt more excited to listen to other bands' music than Pearl Jam at various points. So I think we'll kind of talk about some of those bands. I'm not sure if on your list you ended up going with pre-Pearl Jam bands. So I'll let you talk about that when you get to it. Mine are all bands who took the belt from Pearl Jam. So I certainly had my Guns N' Roses, Metallica era before Pearl Jam, but we're gonna stick with that. So I'm gonna do my list.
So none of those bands got anywhere close to the top 5, but as I was putting the list together, I felt weird not including them on the list. So like I do have Guns N' Roses, Air Supply. I was young once.
Oh, yeah.
Bon Jovi, Michael Jackson, and New Edition are down at the bottom of my list, but they were definitely belt holders before I discovered Pearl Jam.
Yeah. So I did my list chronologically, so I'm going to do mine in order.
All right.
Not of who I like the most, but just in the order in which they threatened the belt or held the belt for a while. So
how hard was it to get to 5?
To get down to 5, to pare it down to 5. It wasn't
or tie break between 6 and 7 with 5.
So yeah, so I would say really my list of bands that I considered for this was 7 deep. There's a couple others I can throw in as honorable mentions, but it wasn't actually too hard because the 5 bands I picked are so fundamentally me. I told you this before recording. You're not going to be surprised, I don't think, by any of my list. They are all bands that I talk about all the time. These are like my favorite bands of all time. So,
and I'm really excited for this though, because I feel like as much as you and I might be, oh yeah, of course, I think this will be kind of a way to really, especially as it's kind of a new podcast, we're letting people get to know kind of who we are and where our DNA is.
Yeah, for sure.
So without further ado, what was your number 5?
So, well, for me, I'm going to call it my number 1 because it was the first band who
Okay.
chronologically took the belt from Pearl Jam. But for me, it's Queens of the Stone Age. And this really happened, I would say from 1992 till uh, probably about 2002, I would say. There was no dispute, really. It was pretty much Pearl Jam. One of my honorable mentions I'll talk about was before this band, uh, but Queens of the Stone Age, so interestingly enough, I'll preface this by saying it was not their first self-titled album. It wasn't rated R. It was Songs for the Deaf that did this for me. Even I don't know how I didn't hear their self-titled album, their debut. I never heard it until after Songs for the Deaf came out. And the reason I'm surprised I never heard it was because it was on Stone Gossard's Loose Groove Records. Stone Gossard put out Queens of the Stone Age's first album, and
I had no idea.
somehow that just totally escaped me. So I had no knowledge of that album. With Rated R, I had heard Lost Art of Keeping a Secret on the radio, but I just, for whatever reason, I don't think I ever listened to that album because, again, back at that time, like, you had to buy the albums. You had to be sure you liked them, before you bought it. But when I went to college, I discovered, like, hey, there are ways of getting music without paying for it. And so in this era of pre-releases, I heard Songs for the Deaf well before it actually came out. I had a download of it.
So I don't know Queens of the
And
Stone Age nearly as well as you do, obviously. So give me the timeline. At what point is Dave Grohl drumming for them and everything
yeah,
else? Like, how does
so
that all come together?
so Songs for the Deaf came out in 2002. So they've at that point, Queens of the Stone Age were, for all intents and purposes, a 2-person band. It was
Kind of a
Josh
side
Homme.
project,
It
right?
was it was so sort of, yeah. So Josh Homme and Nick Oliveri, they came from Caius. But Josh had always been doing these desert sessions where he would get together some of his buddies and they would just go out in the desert and put out these like crazy like stoner rock influence, like um sort of noisy ambient, like dirty sounding, like what you would think of a bunch of dudes like going and getting sweaty in the desert and putting out this swampy music, right? Like, and that was Desert Sessions. And through that, I think Dave Grohl, I don't know what the exact connection was. Josh played with the Screaming Trees for a while, and so he was certainly in and around that Seattle scene, even though he's not from Seattle. He had certainly spent time in that area, and he got to know Dave Grohl. So in 2002, that's when they put out Songs for the Deaf, and when I heard that album, that was like the first time that like something like just clicked with me. That was like, man, like I was into that album and I listened to it by the time that album actually came out, I had already listened to it probably 50 times. Like I just never, like my friends would complain like, dude, listen to something else. Like I just, from beginning to end, nonstop. I absolutely love that album. And I went back then, bought Rated R, bought the self-titled debut, was into them. And then, and certainly when Lullabies to Paralyze came out then in 2005, I loved that album as well. And at that point, I would say like they had their hands on the belt. Like that was a band that I was probably more excited for new music than I was from Pearl Jam at that point in time. Um, you know, over time, like I don't know that I would say my love for them has waned, but they've just become a very inactive band.
Yeah.
After, they put out Era Vulgaris in 2007, and then they didn't put out another album until 2013 with Like Clockwork. Then there's like another 4-year gap, and then another 4 or 5 year gap. So they've really slowed down. Josh has been going through a lot in his personal life. He had some health issues, went through a nasty divorce that's we don't need to talk about, but there's some ugly stuff going on with that.
That's a different YouTube channel with a lot more hits and clicks.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nick Oliveri is no longer with the band either. Like Josh had to kick him out of the band because he was accused of assaulting a woman, and so it was like a lot has changed with that band through year, but they've actually solidified into an actual.
So when we talk
now.
about canceled artists and separating the art from the artist, that episode we can talk about that one again.
Talk about some of that. So, but they've solidified themselves as a band now. Like there are 4 or 5 members. But they've slowed down. They go at their own pace. But like, I think all their albums, since I've started putting together my year-end list, I think every one of their albums has been in my top 5. So just absolutely one of my unimpeachable all-time favorite bands is Queens of the Stone Age.
All right. So my number 5, I'm going straight to college. You're in the college scenario where you and I are of an age where you still had to buy things to really get a handle on trying things out. But my freshman year dorm, I had some influential people showing me some of the stuff from where they grew up, and then I was sharing a lot of like the heavier stuff from Cleveland, because Cleveland's a metal town. So I was showing people Meshuggah and some of the crazy metal and hardcore stuff that I knew about that was interesting. And then I was being introduced to indie rock and emo. And when I heard Mineral for the first time, I was just completely and utterly blown away. In '97, they released The Power of Failing, and I'd heard that, but when they released End Serenading in 1998, I knew that this was the band for me. And it was also kind of a mysterious situation because the band broke up while they were making that final album. And so there was something about not being able to go see them and thinking that they weren't going to be releasing any other material. The lead singer Chris Simpson and the bass player Jeremy Gomez went on to do stuff with some other side projects and different bands, but Mineral, for all practical purposes, was never going to exist again. And so that music and those songs that I had just completely was taken by, it felt so final, and there was just an extra level of specialness to it, because when supply is limited and something becomes rare, it's almost like it burned out without anybody dying, like where Nirvana felt more special after Kurt passed. This felt special because they broke up and we just knew or thought that we were never going to get it again. And so my love of these records continued forever, all the way through. And then they got back together to do some tours around the anniversary of End Serenading and the anniversary of the band. And I got to see them in Cleveland, and then they played another show in Chicago, which I got on a plane by myself, stayed in Chicago by myself, went to a show by myself, because that's how much I needed to go see that show. And I really wanted to do it. So, that's my number 5.
Mineral was one that I had never even heard of. I never had even heard of that band until talking to you, and you talked about them and turned them on to me. I did listen to End Serenading, and it is a phenomenal record. It really is. I am not near as into emo as you are, so it I feel like that says something, that alone, that I enjoyed that album as much as I did. That definitely really, really good album.
Yeah, and even, I had a band back in the early 2000s, and we used to cover a song from The Power of Failing, If I Could. And yeah, just whenever possible, I felt like that band was kind of weaving in and out of my life. I still listen to End Serenading. It's a very fall record for me. Some albums it's a time of year thing. And that one, the dying season is when I listen to End Serenading. So
There we go.
that's my number 5.
All right.
Let's jump to your number 4.
Okay, so my next band then, I discovered it in 2013. So at this point, I'd been in the workforce for a while, and I was really getting into the indie blogs. This was like the indie blog era.
Were you in the workforce drowning?
Ooh, nice. I like it. A little Thursday reference. But that is not where I'm going with this.
Oh,
Although that would have been perfect. That would have been perfect. I do love Thursday, but they never quite had the belt. But so at that time, like the early 2010s, there were just tons of indie blogs, like these blogs that would all these indie bands and labels would just send them all this music, just tons of music, and these people would throw it out on their blog and say, hey, here's this band, and I was listening to all of it. I was trying to find things that I loved at that point, because I was feeling a little stagnant at that time with new music. I just wasn't finding new bands that were interesting to me. So one day this EP got released, and I listened to it, and it was by Dead Confederate. They're a band out of, they were a band out of Athens, Georgia. At that time, Athens had this killer scene happening, actually. Like the Wigs came out of that. I'm trying to remember. There were a couple other bands that were really great coming out of that.
This is a band
area.
Similar to Mineral that I had never heard of until I met you and we started talking, and I never felt as in love as you did, but man, some of those records are just unbelievable.
And so they so the same year that they put out that EP, they also then put out their debut album Wrecking Ball, and they sort of combine elements of bring like a Sonic Youth vibe to a Southern rock mixed with grunge, sort of like their singer T. Hardy Morris. He has a little bit of a Kurt Cobain style of delivery, so there were a lot of immediate comparisons to that. But musically, it was, like I said, a little bit more Southern rock, a little bit of grunge, a little bit of that Sonic Youth like expansiveness,
a little of that dirt from like Dinosaur Jr. kind of sounds like it was all written in a garage,
which makes sense because Jay Mascis actually played guitar on their second album on Sugar. He played on he did this. I don't know if he played on the whole song or if he just did the solo, so that was a band. They only released 3 albums. They did Wrecking Ball in 2013. Sugar was, actually,
Sugar was 2010.
Yeah, I would say, I'm actually, now that I think about it, I bet you that Wrecking Ball was probably 2007, maybe 2008. Yeah. And then Sugar 2009, and then In the Morrow was their last album. That was probably the one that was 2013. So I had my years mixed up a little bit there, but they put out 3 albums. They had like a little bit of success. Like Pitchfork reviewed their album, which was a big deal, even though Pitchfork hated it. I think I looked today. I think they gave Wrecking Ball a 5.8, I think.
On the Pitchfork scale, that's not even the end of the world.
Yeah, it's not it. Well, it actually kind of is, because when Pitchfork drops gives bands like their 2s and 3 scores, there's almost like something that's almost like an FU edge to it that almost gives that more credence. It's like that 5.8. If you're in the 5 range, it's really they just don't care about it. But they played on Conan O'Brien. They killed it on Conan O'Brien. You can go on YouTube and find tons of live videos of them, and they are just phenomenal live. But they just never caught on big enough to really make it. And most of the band members moved on to real life. Their bass player, he's a web developer now, I think. One guitarist, he's doing art. T. Hardy Morris, he still does some solo stuff, but it's a shame they're not still around, because I really miss them a lot. I loved this band, but
from the Wikipedia page, the band's original drummer now works as an electrician.
Okay.
which is fine, but it
Yeah.
reads funny on the Wikipedia page for a beloved band.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just goes to show this disconnect between things that to me, like, I thought this was like the best band in the world, and they just couldn't find a big enough audience to really sustain. And I don't really know why that is. Like, I don't know what it is about them that they couldn't even catch on big enough. Like, I didn't expect them to be like playing arenas or anything like that, but to me, they were a good enough band that it seems like they should have been able to have a longer career than 5 years or whatever it was.
When I think they were a little bit ahead of their time,
Yeah.
a little bit out of order, because if you take that band, because they also played with a little bit of slide guitar, almost kind
Oh
of a
yeah.
country bent. And
Yes.
so you just imagine them on tour with Jason Isbell. You imagine,
Yeah.
you
Yep.
know, the market for that style of music that's not quite rock, not quite country, but definitely songwriter focused
Yeah.
and melodic and somewhere in between is more pronounced. That market is more pronounced today. And that's not to say it's ginormous, but
Right.
it that lane exists more today than it probably did when they were doing their thing.
Yeah. That's a good point. So,
But
so yeah.
never say never. We could get the
Yeah,
reunion.
you never
If
know. You
Mineral
never
taught us
know.
anything.
That's right. That's right. So, and look, I'm lucky. I got to see them a couple times live. And it's one of those things, you've talked about this in the past. Like, I got to talk to them at their merch table after one of their shows. It was just, I had like stars in my eyes. Like, I felt like I was talking to bona fide rock stars, but like, because I adored that band. And so, yeah, that was my next one, Dead Confederate.
All right, my number four, and I know I've named a band that a lot of you might not have heard of, and I'm about to name another one that you might not have heard of. I will not be too cool for the room on my top three, I promise. But this is my life. This is my life as a Clevelander, with my friends growing up. My number four is Acid Bath. They are a death metal, a melodic, sludgy death metal band from Louisiana. They never quite made it big, but they were the biggest thing in my life and my friends' lives in the Cleveland area. I got to see them live twice. I got to meet them and hang out with them one time. Um, and their music when I was 15, 16, 17 was just everything to me. Uh, this is funny. So when I was a teenager and I started getting into computers and my first internet connection, I bought a book on HTML at Micro Center and I built my own websites. And so I built the first homepage, the fan homepage for Acid Bath on the web. I
Can I
got to
just
know
say
their
real
label.
quick, by the way,
Go
this
ahead.
is funny because I made a Dead Confederate fan page.
That's
So,
awesome.
yeah.
We are those people.
Yep.
um, but
And
yeah,
I actually got an email from their management that they were actually not super happy with me
wow.
because they felt that it looked too official. That seriously, like, I don't remember what my URL was. I don't even remember anymore, but it was like, it wasn't deadconfederate.com, but it was like deadconfederatemusic.com or something like that. And
Yeah.
so I got the letter like, hey, this is, we're a little concerned about people thinking that this is official. Can you make sure that it says unofficial somewhere on there? So, yeah.
Yeah,
Anyways.
mine was like pre vanity URLs. Like I didn't even know how to
Yeah.
do that. So
GeoCities.
mine was hanging off the free space that I was given as part of my ISP, which was a
Okay. Yep.
dial-up here in Northeast Ohio. So I had this weird URL with a tilde and then my
Yeah.
username.
Yep.
And then
netlink.com /
and then you had to
tilde.
go
Yeah.
to and then you had to go to acidbath.html.
Yep. Oh yeah.
But I ended up getting listed on search engines as such as they were at the time, and I had pictures up there. I used to accrue costs for hosting those images. It's
Yeah.
just funny to think about now. But I got in touch with they got in touch with me. I had a copy of their second record a month before anybody else did, so my friends thought I was the king of the world because we were listening to my disc in the garage a full month before it was actually out. And yeah, so but that band, it's brutal. The lyrics don't hold up. You know, they're kind of embarrassingly violent and grotesque, much like Cannibal Corpse or any of the death metal bands from that time period. But I've kind of made peace with it. I still like to listen to it today, and my friends, who are all just incredible musicians, they actually the band. So the bass player passed away from he was hit by a drunk driver, and then the band kind of folded thereafter. Lead singer Dax Riggs went on to have something of a reasonable solo career, not playing metal anymore, just kind of more bluesy singer-songwriter. The guitarist Sammy Pierre Douay has been in a bunch of metal bands and continues to tour all the time. My friends put together an Acid Bath tribute band just for fun, and they ended up touring all over the country as that tribute band. And they played last year. They were lucky enough to play in Louisiana near Acid Bath's hometown, and the guitarist from Acid Bath joined them on stage and played some songs with them. So there's lots of I got a lot of personal ties to Acid Bath in the weirdest possible way that launches them to the top of my list in ways that it probably couldn't for other people.
Yeah, I think sometimes with music, there's context that matters. And when you turned me on to Acid Bath and I tried giving it a listen, it's hard to, without any of that context, it's a challenging thing to go back and get into.
Yeah, man, you had to be there.
but that sometimes that matters. Like that's the joy of music. It's like this, the quote unquote soundtrack of your life, but like your DNA is like your past is littered with the moments that are tied to different music, and the way that context leads you to certain bands having maybe more impact on you than it would, for other people, or, and sometimes it's just a timing thing. An album might come at the right time in your life where you needed to hear that, or whatever the case may be. So.
Well, and that's the nature of this conversation too. Like if we were having a conversation about my favorite bands that I think that I could sell to you, or to the royal right. You, the audience out there, I got a lot of them, but I would never try and sell anybody that unless they already liked metal or death metal or hardcore. I would never try and sell anybody on Acid Bath. It's a tough sell.
It is.
And with that, let's go to your number 3.
My number 3. So this was happening about the same time that I was into Dead Confederate. And I probably also picked up on their debut album from an indie blog, I'm guessing. I'm talking about Titus Andronicus, punk band out of New Jersey. Really, for all intents and purposes, it's the brainchild of Patrick Stickles. He's the only person that's been around for every single album. He's sort of had a rotating cast of bandmates around him for different eras of that band. But in 2008, they came out with the Airing of Grievances, and I listened to it and I really liked it. It was different. It was definitely punk, but it was punk without the power chords. Like Patrick is an amazing guitarist, and he's writing all these, like, mixing these jangly lead parts and these searing guitar solos, and like it was like, oh, this is different. I would say his voice is an acquired taste. It's definitely the thing that probably turns most people off to Titus Andronicus, is Patrick's vocals. But I personally actually love them. Once you sort of get used to his delivery, and he's an incredible lyricist, and the vocal melodies are there. He's just not always delivering them in a conventional way. But the Area of Grievances I thought was good. I liked it a lot, but not enough for me to say like this is going to be one of my favorite bands. But then in 2010, they put out The Monitor, and this is probably one of the most monumental, fundamental albums of my life. If Pearl Jam's Yield is my all-time favorite album, it's a two-way tie between Soundgarden's Down on the Upside and Titus Andronicus' The Monitor for my second favorite album of all time. I don't go a month without listening to this album still to this day. It is this epic punk rock opera almost. Like, it's telling a story of of life on the road as a touring band member, but it's told through the vision or through the imagery of the Civil War. It's interlaced with clips of speeches from Abraham Lincoln. The final song, Battle of Hampton Road, talks about a famous Civil War battle between two massive ships,
between the Monitor and the CSS Virginia, which took place in 1862.
Yep. So, this is stuff you could choose to roll your eyes at if you want to, but like, he was going for something. Like, he had something to say. He had an idea of how to tell this story in an unconventional manner, and everything about this album just speaks to my very musical core. This album is in my soul.
And it's a maybe an acquired taste, but Pitchfork included on their list. It was number 10 of the year in 2010 for them. So you're not the only one.
No, this album is a bona fide, like, anybody who pays attention to sort of this genre of music, this is a elite album that is absolutely revered by everybody. Like, this is not an unconventional take on the Monitor. Now, it's one of those albums that even if you personally don't like it, it's like an Oscar candidate movie that you may not like it, but you recognize the artistry, you recognize the degree of difficulty, and you recognize the accomplishment of putting it together. And it's an album with hardly any verses or choruses. It's almost written. I always say to people when I'm describing it, I always say it's almost written like classical music, where you've got movements and returns. There's not a lot of verse, chorus, verse structure in these songs. They're linear journeys. Like, this is an album you listen to from beginning to end. You don't really pick songs out of it. There are songs that you can listen to and enjoy on their own, but primarily this is an album intended to be listened to in its entirety from beginning to end. I think Titus Andronicus's post-Monitor releases have been fairly divisive. A lot of people kind of jumped off the train after that. I personally have loved all of their albums, and I thought that The Will to Live, their last album, was like a true, like, return to form for them. Like, that album finished in my top 5 for the year. I think that one holds up on its own very strong. And so this is a band to this day. If they put out an album, I am totally geeked out about them. This is a very strong contender. This is probably one of my 5 favorite bands of all time. So this was a no-brainer for me to include on my list.
All right, number 3, I'm starting to have some things for the people. It's no longer just these weird ones that nobody's ever heard of. Number 3 for me is Death Cab for Cutie. I fell in love with this band. It's one of the bands, there are only a handful of bands in my life that I can say that I was there at the very beginning. Now, the very, very beginning, I don't know, but a buddy of mine told me about this band back when I still lived in Boston at the tail end of my college days. And they were playing an afternoon show at the Middle East in Cambridge, which is a legendary rock club in the basement. It's a former duckpin bowling lane. It's very long and narrow with very low ceilings. And so I went and got to see Death Cab play an afternoon show there, and I was just hooked. This was back in the day where they were on Barsook Records, which is a label out of Seattle, Washington, where they're from, or somewhere in Bellingham, Washington, wherever, somewhere up there. And they had demo MP3s that you could download to try out the album.
Yep.
And so I had all of the demos downloaded, and I listened to it so many times over and over and over again that I instantly bought the 2 records that were out, because Something About Airplanes was out and We Have the Facts and We're Voting Yes was out. So that's kind of the vintage of when I jumped on board. But it never stopped. It just never stopped. I saw them a bunch more times, including when I started to date my future wife. She lived in Chicago, and I went there to see Ben Gibbard play a solo acoustic show at Shuba's Tavern. I got to meet Ben after that show. Then when they played the Metro, the same, not the Bartman years when the Cubs were in the World Series.
Yeah.
I was I was in Chicago that weekend, but I was at the Metro watching
Okay.
Death Cab. And then of course that was by that point they had already released Transatlanticism. I essentially dated my wife to that album. Um, and so I was just all in on Death Cab for the longest time. It did wane a little bit there. I kind of fell off for a while, but over the last 3 years, I've jumped straight back in. I took my kids to see them. I took my whole family to see them. It's continued on. It was just a very, very important band for me because of the way it weaved through my life, because the way the style and the lyrics. It's kind of strange that I fell in love with them as much as I did, because usually I would fall in love with a band with a vocalist with a more extensive range who goes for it more. Ben Gibbard never really screams. He never really goes to the top of his range. He doesn't have one of these. He's no Chris Cornell, but something about the way he writes and the choruses and the builds and the drama that he creates with his songwriting, I just fell in love with it all.
I would say, like, I feel like Death Cab is one of the most quintessentially you bands. In the time of our friendship, I would say it's probably one of the bands I've heard you talk about the most. I think it was probably one of the first bands that, like, you really like. I remember that you talking about just how much they meant to you personally. So this one does not surprise me being on your list. Definitely not.
All right, so I think we're to your number 2.
Yep. And so this one for me, I discovered because they were from Cleveland, which originally made me sort of want to
I'm all
pay
excited because I
attention.
know where you're going.
So I wanted to pay attention. They're from Cleveland, and it was this what you would almost call bedroom rock. They were playing. It was just essentially it was one guy playing on his guitar, the drum machine, and it was not the most exciting music when I first heard it. So I might as well say who it is. It's Cloud Nothings, started by Dylan Baldy out of Cleveland. I think literally might have recorded this in his basement at his parents' house. The debut
While he was
album,
a student at
Turning
Case Western
On.
Reserve.
Yeah, and so I liked it. I could hear through the like sort of lo-fi vibe. I could hear these like incredibly catchy melodies he kept lacing into these songs, but it wasn't really my style of music. But I was intrigued. I was like, this is pretty cool. This is like a really good musician out of Cleveland. Like, okay, cool. They put out a self-titled album, which I liked a lot less than Turning On, which was the first thing I'd heard by them.
And that was in 2011.
2011. Okay. And so, you know, what, yeah, it was fine, you know. So then I still remember it was in the winter. I had gone grocery shopping. I'd just gotten a new car. I was leasing a new car, and so I had an XM subscription, and I was listening to like the indie station on XM. And I remember the DJ saying, "Hey, we've got this new song from Cloud Nothings. They got a new album coming out." And I remember him saying, "This song has a different vibe to it." And he goes, "I'm really not sure if I'm super into it. I hope this isn't the direction that they're going," or something along those lines. Because remember, this
Which
is
song
coming
was
from,
it?
What's that?
Which song was it?
Well, it was oh my gosh, it was the first single,
No Future, No Past?
No Future, No Past. You
Okay.
gotta remember, this is coming from an indie channel. Like, they were into the lo-fi bedroom rock stuff. Like, they wanted more of that. And so the song starts, you know, and it starts with the piano, and this song just starts to build. And all of a sudden, for anybody who's ever heard this song, I mean, in the halfway through, it just erupts into the No Future, No Past part. And I was like, I wanted to
it's like Zach De La Roca took over Dylan Baldy's spirit.
And I wanted to pull my car over. Like, I was like, what on earth? Like, this is so great. Like, I could not believe how good this song was. And to come from what I'd heard previously, and we talk about this, but like, you're going to notice the drums. Like, I'm not always the guy who notices drumming the first. I've never played drums, so I don't have that connection with my ear when I listen to music. I'm not inclined to listen to the drums, but the drums are inescapable on that. Well, now throughout Cloud Nothings, but on Attack on Memory, Dylan went out, put a real band together. It was no longer just Dylan doing it himself. And that Attack on Memory it's heavy, but it like it's so catchy. Like some of the choruses on that album are just so catchy.
And I'm gonna butcher his name, but his drummer Jason Garrix,
there's a lot of letters in
G-E-R-Y-C-Z.
Yeah,
he is just an unbelievable addition to the band, and you and I were around when he was added.
Yes,
so we can say that.
Yes,
but, and Attack on Memory was also engineered by Steve Albini, who did In Utero.
Yeah, also worth noting.
And the sound of that record is just so incredible, and the songs obviously follow suit.
Yeah, and so that was incredible. So I was like, okay, I am into this band. So that's sort of like them reaching out for the belt. And then they put out Here and Nowhere Else, which is my personal favorite Cloud Nothings album to this day. And that was when they had the belt. Like when that album came out, they absolutely had the belt. And I still remember you and I talking when we first heard Here and Nowhere Else. The production style is so different from Attack on Memory. Like our first initial instinct was, boy, I don't know about this. Like it was almost jarring. Like it took us multiple listens. I just remember us like talking about like, hey, I listened to it again. Like it's a lot better on the second listen. And then I get, dude, it's even better on the third listen. And we're like, fourth listen, like, dude, this is still getting better. What's going on with this album? Like that album is just insanely great.
But we had to get used to it because it was so different. You know, where some bands find that they find their sound in the studio, and they just they write different songs, but they kind of keep repeating, all right, well, the drums always sound like this, and the bass always kind of sounds like this. And it's just variations on a theme.
Right.
Cloud Nothings haven't done that yet.
Right. Because then they followed that up with Life Without Sound, which was yet again, not only was that another change in production style, but it was also a change in tone in general. Like it was, you know, I don't like to use the word softer for it, but I mean, I guess it was like it was a more melodic album than, you know, the just like straightforward rock, like hard rock sound that they had on those previous couple albums. But I loved that album too.
Yet another engineer and producer. Another different one.
Yeah. And so at that point, like Cloud Nothings, they definitely had the belt. I would say like, while I have loved everything they've put out, Last Building Burning, Shadow I Remember, they did a
Black Hole Understands.
I didn't quite hold those albums in quite as high of regard as I did those well, not first three, but those previous three albums that I loved. But I will say, you know, topically right now, Cloud Nothings just announced they got a new album coming out, and they put out 2 songs off of it, and I am all in on these two songs they've released so far. And it is again another production shift, you know, and a label shift, and I think I said that for the first time when I'm listening to it, I kind of feel a connection to a previous album. To me, these sound like Life Without Sound era Cloud Nothings to me a little bit. So I'm curious to see what this album sounds like, but they're a band that definitely is still to this day one of my favorite bands for sure.
Yeah, they didn't crack my top 5 as like a belt holder, but especially because they always seem to play Cleveland. I've seen them live a number of times, including I got to see them in the Happy Dog with like maybe 75 people.
Well, we saw them together at Mahall's.
We did at Mayhall's. Yeah,
Mayhall's.
But those experiences of being able to see that band live in the tiniest places on earth, you know, hometown shows or whatever, it's just been phenomenal.
Yep.
Just phenomenal.
Yep. So that was my Well, I called it my number 4 because I'm going chronologically, but I guess my number 2. So what?
Yeah. All
How?
right. So my number two, and this is probably the first band that really took the mantle, or maybe the second band that took the mantle from Pearl Jam. I'm going with Tool. Um, I was absolutely in, and I know Tool's got one of the biggest fan bases in the world. They're still one of the biggest rock touring bands in existence, and they sell out basically every show they play. I'm a little bit over them these days for reasons that we could probably get into at some point, um, but mostly because I've seen them so many times, and I've loved them so much over such a long period of time. I never got to see him at Lollapalooza, or I never got to see him the first time they were on Lollapalooza, but I got to see them shortly thereafter. They played a show at Nautica with Flaming Lips opening up. It was one of my first big mosh pits. That was before they had the top on Nautica, so it was like
Yeah.
110 degrees. At the end of the show, I caught Danny Carey's drumstick. I still have it around here somewhere. I should bring it out.
Nice.
It's crazy. It's got it's like a normal drumstick, but it's got like a bulb, like a handle on it.
Yeah.
I should really have pulled it out. But then I was lucky enough, I got tickets to go see them at the Agora on the first leg of their Anima tour before they really hit the big time.
Yep.
And shortly thereafter, they grew to the point where they played small arenas and basketball arenas, things like that. So I was lucky enough to see them 3 or 4
Did you see
times on
them
the
at
way up.
the this was probably the Lateralis tour when they played this at CSU at the Convocation Center with Meshuggah opening?
I never saw that one. I saw
I was
them
at that I
on
was at that one, which was an
a
awesome
different
show.
leg of the Lateralis tour where they played. It was Gund Arena at the time.
Okay. Maybe it wasn't Lateralis. I can't remember which tour that was, but yeah,
I can't remember
it
either.
was at
But really,
CSU.
what it comes down to for me was Anima. Anima. I
Yeah.
loved Undertow, and I was just in love with that record. But when
Undertow was
Anima
kind
came
of
out,
scary. Like
yeah,
that, like the sober video was so weird. Like for us at that age, too. Like I just remember like thinking like the Tool, that kind of like almost kind of scary. Like because they were mysterious. You didn't know what the vibe of the band really was. Yeah, at that point, I
when I
too
know.
I too liked Undertow a lot.
And I know one of the big reasons, one of the cementing factors for you with Pearl Jam and specifically Yield is message board culture and how you got into that
Yep.
and really deep diving into all the details. Tool was maybe one of the first bands with
Oh yeah.
toolshed.down.net.
Oh
They
yeah.
had a homepage and people song lyrics and song meanings and people with theories trying to extrapolate and figure out what the hell that band was talking about.
Yeah.
um, and so there was like a geeky sci-fi angle almost to
Yes.
being a fan of Tool, and I
Yeah.
dove deep into all that stuff. I started listening to bands that they liked, like the Melvins. I never would have listened to the Melvins
Mhm.
without Tool. And so that's the kind of hold that band had on me, where it wasn't just I was following the extraneous paths away from Tool as well.
So I'll tell you, this is one of my honorable mention bands. This is a band that when I talked about some of the ones that were before Queens of the Stone Age that could have had the belt, Tool is definitely an honorable mention one. I went all the way up to Toronto to see them at Edgefest one year. Um, I've seen them probably 3 or 4 times as well, which for me is a lot. um, I I don't know how you can, if you are like, I always struggle with like if you're a musician and like how you cannot at least be intrigued by the construction of these songs that Tool writes. Like because again, similar to sort of what I was saying with Titus Andronicus, like, well, Tool does definitely have verses and choruses, but these are songs that feel linear. You're going on a journey with these songs from beginning to end, and I love everything about Tool. You and I are similar. We've both sort of grown a little bit tired of certain aspects of their shtick, if you will, or
Yep.
we have our frustrations with maybe Maynard a little bit for certain things, but but I still love this band, listen to them all the time.
Yeah, me too. And maybe the most iconic story for me with this band. So when I first became a dad, I knew I was going to take my kids to shows. And so when my oldest son, who's now 13, when the day that he finished the first grade, I came home, I picked him up, we drove to Pittsburgh, we checked into a hotel, we grabbed some dinner, we walked up the hill to the arena at Pitt, and
Yeah.
I believe my son was about the youngest person at the Tool show in Pittsburgh that night. We did it together. He had the ear protection on. Um, I was wearing my Deafheaven t-shirt that night, so
Oh,
that's
huh.
didn't make my list today, but someday we'll
Foreshadowing.
talk about. Oh,
Foreshadowing.
I guess we're going to talk about Deafheaven. I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean to spoil it. But I took my first grader to see Tool.
Yeah, that's awesome. You've told me that story before, and I absolutely love that story. It's phenomenal.
So, Andrew, who's your number one?
All right. Well,
Or most recent to take the belt in this
the
case.
most recent to take the belt, indeed. And this is the band most threatening right now, still to this day. It is obviously, we just mentioned it. It's Deafheaven, and I might as well.
And before you go on, my level of infatuation with Deafheaven is on par. On par. That top five is competitive.
It is, yeah. So
go ahead.
And I'll tell the story of my journey with Deafheaven. I was not familiar with them at all when they put out their debut album, Roads to Judah. Never heard it, didn't know anything about it. Again, this is probably a blog story because there were still the blogs around, and all of a sudden they all started talking about this album, Sunbather, and it had such an impossible to not pay attention to this album cover. There was just something about that album cover that just drew you into it. Like it was like you couldn't not notice that album cover, and
it's
was
bright pink
everywhere.
It's bright pink, and all the lettering is white, and it's just SUNBATHER in giant letters. It's iconic looking.
Yes. One of the best album covers ever by far. But anyways, so all these blogs started talking about it. So I listened to it, and I had no experience at this point really with black metal. And Deafheaven are not a pure black metal band. It's just one of their influences. But George Clark, their singer, is a black metal style singer.
Which means he screams like a banshee.
It's this high pitched. I always said it's like he's trying to like swallow glass, like trying to force glass down his throat. It's almost like a wispy. Whereas like death metal is like that guttural, like you're singing it from down here, like
Cookie Monster vocals.
Yeah, the Deafheaven register, that black metal register is higher, and I had never heard it before, and I hated it. I couldn't stand it. I remember talking to Craig about it. I would just be like, dude, like this Deafheaven, like everybody's talking about it. Like, I can't stand this. It's terrible. And you're like, what are you talking about? Like, this album is phenomenal. And I was like,
and I only discovered it toward the end of the year when the best of list started coming out. And I read about it on a best of. So this must have been 5-6 months after it came out. 5 months after it came out.
Yeah.
And I never listened to it the first time around. But once I saw it,
that's how it went. Sorry, I didn't mean to
I
cut
saw
you
it on
off,
a year-end list, and I listened to it, and I was like, oh my God, this is one of the best things I've ever heard.
That's when you brought it to me. You're like, hey, have you heard of Deafheaven? And I was like, oh, dude, they're terrible. They suck. I listened to it because I had listened to it when it came out, and I never listened to it again. I thought it was so awful. There was this great blog called I Rock Cleveland. Wish I can remember the guy's name who did it. I really miss his site a lot. He was a great indie blog writer. But he was just raving about this album. And I remember going back and forth with him in the comments when it came out a little bit because I just didn't understand it. I will say like I loved the transition pieces in the music, the moments between the vocals. I definitely loved those. I was like, God, if only this band had a singer, if only they could sing. And it's funny for me to say this now because we're going to talk about this. But so, anyways, so months go by, and that's when at year end, Craig tells me like, "Hey, have you heard this Deafheaven?" I'm like, "Ah, they're terrible." And Craig would not let it go. He kept telling me, listen to it again. You have to listen to it again. There's no way you're not going to like it. Just give it a shot. Like, just try to like, and I think you probably were probably maybe even the first one to tell me, like, just accept the vocals as part of the background, like the music. Like, it's, you can't go into it expecting them to be what traditional vocals are. And whatever
Well,
it was.
once upon a time, let me go to
Yeah.
the so when the same person who introduced Mineral to me way back in the day is the one that I introduced Meshuggah to, and he just did not get it at all. And then I finally said to him, well, so everything in Meshuggah is essentially doing a different rhythm, and they all end up lining up at some point. So think of the singer like a percussion instrument.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I gave it another listen, and I still wasn't sold on the vocals yet. I'll probably on that next listen, but man, the music is just inescapable. You want to talk about music that takes you to another place. Like that's Deafheaven's music. They these songs build.
I mean,
They
Dream House, the Pecan Tree, I could just cry listening to
Oh
those songs.
God.
They're so amazing.
And they'll build to these heavy these heavy blast beat parts, and then all of a sudden the blast beat goes away and it just washes like a wave into these ethereal moments of these like interlaced guitar playing that is just I don't even have the words to describe how otherworldly Deafheaven's music is, but so I did eventually fall in love with Sunbather. And then when New Bermuda came out, once again, I loved everything about that album. And at that point, I was actually now I love the vocals of Deafheaven. Like to me, it adds so much to that music, and I can understand what he's doing, and not to mention the degree of difficulty of singing like that is just insane. So New Bermuda, love that. And then for me, when they put out Ordinary Corrupt Human Love, that was when I was like, okay, this might be the best band in the world. And I still hold that opinion today. Like, I will say that Pearl Jam is my favorite band, but I am not convinced that Deafheaven is not the best band in the world right now. I think that highly of them. There's nobody that does what they do in the same way that can even touch what they're doing. Now we can talk a little bit about, if there's a reason they don't have the belt. Infinite Granite was an album I liked, and I think I probably ranked it pretty high on my year-end list, actually. But over time, I have sort of fallen out of love with Infinite Granite. And the biggest thing people will talk about with that is obviously the vocals, because they did go to more singing and very few screams in that album. And it sort of has sort of a slow dive or ride type of influence. And to me, like those bands that like lean more into that more traditional shoegazy thing, those bands do it so much better than Deafheaven did. So that's sort of my problem with Infinite Granite. But I will say, like, I've already got the itch for their next album. I don't care what it sounds like, if they're singing or if they're screaming again. I want to see what direction they're going to go. I'm all in on this band. This is a band I'm going to be listening to for the rest of my life, without a doubt. Like, this is, like, I'll use that word again, unimpeachable, pure greatness. Every element of this band, there's not a weak spot in this band. All the musicians are phenomenal musicians. It's incredible band. So yeah, Deafheaven is Pearl Jam's biggest threat to this day.
Well, at some point we'll redo some of this Deafheaven stuff and we'll have a deeper conversation about them. But as far as Infinite Granite goes, they've played 9 shows in 2024, and they've not played a single song from Infinite Granite yet.
Interesting.
And some of that has to do with the fact that they open for they're not a headliner on a lot of these tours.
Yeah.
So they're only playing 5 songs because their songs are also really long. But they've played Black Brick, Brought to the Water, Dream House, Gifts for the Earth, and Sunbather.
What a set. What a set.
It
man.
is, but nothing from Infinite Granite, not even the one screamer Mombasa.
You know,
So
we Craig and I were robbed. We had tickets to see
Deafheaven
and Greet Death. Greet Death was supposed to open here in Columbus. And this was right when COVID happened. It was, I don't know if you remember the date. Was it March something? I mean, I think it was like March 2020. And so I was so excited because I have not seen Deafheaven live yet. So I was very excited for that show.
We were supposed to go April 8th, 2020.
Yep. And I remember us talking at first, like, so if they have the show, are we going to go? Like, how comfortable are you going, like, being around people? But obviously they ended up canceling everything when everything shut down. And so we got robbed of that show. But one cool thing that Deafheaven did was they put out 10 Years Gone, which is a studio live album. So they took the set list that they were going to play on that tour, and they just recorded it live in the studio and put it out on vinyl. And so, and I mean, it's streaming as well. And so I have that. I love that. I listen to it all the time. And I just think, man, this set is so insane that we were going to get to see. But at least we got like a little piece of it.
Well, once again, I've seen Deafheaven probably 4 or 5 times now, which I feel very fortunate to have been able to see them. But a couple of those times it was like an opener set, or they were on a side stage at a festival.
Yeah.
And so like it's one of those cases, and we've talked about it a couple of times now, where a band will be the biggest thing in yours and my life. But in the wider world, in the market, like they're not multi-millionaire mansion dwelling musicians living high on the hog. Like they were almost definitely hurt horribly financially by missing all that touring time during the pandemic. And so I'm sure that live album was just them doing whatever they possibly could to scrape by and make it
survive. Yep.
So
So, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention Kerry McCoy's guitar playing too. Like, they're such a unique guitar player
and songwriting,
and songwriter, and like I shouldn't slight. Oh my gosh,
one of the best drummers in the world.
Do you have do you have the lineup in front of you? What's the other guitarist's name? Oh my gosh,
yeah, it's George Clark, Kerry McCoy, Daniel Tracy, Shiv Mehra, and Chris Johnson.
Shiv is a phenomenal guitar player too in his own right, so I don't mean to slight him. He's playing some of the more intricate parts in these Deafheaven songs, but Kerry McCoy is just like, he's sort of like the way I feel about Stone Gossard with Pearl Jam. Like, he's just got, like, Stone has this way, like, just a different ear for music, that songs go in a direction you're not expecting. Somehow that you always get surprised by a Stone Gossard song. And that's how I feel about Kerry McCoy to the nth degree, like beyond even like, you know, even beyond what Stone Gossard is doing. But Kerry McCoy is just an absolute musical genius in my mind for how musical he is in a quote unquote heavy metal band. Which, I don't know, if somebody asked you what kind of band is Deafheaven, what would your answer be?
I would just call him metal.
Yeah. So it's probably the easiest short form, but so that's that.
But it's interesting because, you know, you and I have talked about it, but between Deafheaven and Cloud Nothings, you've got some of the most underrated drummers.
Yeah.
They play on very small kits.
Yeah.
They play unbelievably fast, and they're just absolutely incredible. The two of them together,
just ridiculous.
Are just two of the best drummers in America who are completely and totally unheralded because of the bands they play in.
Yep, absolutely. So that concludes my list. What do you got?
So the true best band working today, not Deafheaven, as much as I love it. No, I'm not going to turn this into a competition. Manchester Orchestra. Manchester Orchestra is by far my favorite band going today, by a long shot. The material that they are putting out today and the material that they continue to put out is just unbelievable for a band that's going on their 20th year. You know, they started kind of as a bit of a solo project, became a fully formed band for their their first record, I'm Like a Virgin Losing a Child. The big breakout hit was Mean Everything to Nothing. And then, Simple Math, I loved Simple Math and I thought it was pretty good. I saw that tour. Cope and Hope was okay. And then they released Black Mile to the Surface in 2017, and that is their Dark Side of the Moon so far.
Yeah.
Like that record, it didn't make sense to me that a band this many years on, this many albums in, could put out something so monumental and so insanely good. I already liked them, but this took them to the point where I just absolutely loved them. They followed it up with The Million Masks of God. They could. The Valley of Vision was an EP that they put out. They put out little singles that are better than most things. One-off singles for their one-off show that they do at Thanksgiving down in Atlanta, that are better than some of the stuff that people put as highlights to their records.
It's almost a shame that like they're just relegated to like an offshoot status. Like some of those songs are that good. You're absolutely right.
And they've been through a few lineup changes, but the current lineup, Andy Hall, Robert McDowell, those are the two who have stuck through everything. The principal songwriters, the guitar players, singers. Tim Very is an unbelievable drummer, and then Andy Prince. Andy Prince may be my favorite bass player going today. He's 100 feet tall. He struts around and plays unbelievable bass with unbelievable attitude.
Yes.
Like positive attitude. He is so much fun to watch. He also plays with Kevin Devine in the goddamn band. He looks like he's having the best time.
I would say
that's just what it is.
I feel like his bass playing is like, he's not doing things that are technically proficient. Like in the sense that like, you're not going to listen to be like, man, how does he play that? But he, again, you talk about people who just are musical. He adds so much to the song by understanding exactly where that bass needs to fill, what space it needs to fill in those songs. And you're right, like seeing him play live, it was hard not to notice him as well. Like he was absolutely incredible presence in their live show.
The way he plays bass, his instrument has a voice that melds with the rest of the chorus, and it's unbelievable. But Andy Hall is easily the highlight of the band. Yeah. He is the principal songwriter. He is the creative engine. The way he sings live, he never takes a note off. He goes for every high note. If there's one, when he was on the Simple Math tour and they were playing at the Beachland, he was maybe a little bit precious, and he let kind of a slightly drunken Cleveland crowd get to him, which kind of turned me off for a little bit. Yeah. But it could happen to anybody. But he is just unbelievable. And I traveled last year. I went to Red Rocks in Colorado. They were playing a co-headlining show with Jimmy Eat World, and I always wanted to go to Red Rocks, and there was no band in the world at that time that I could think of that I would rather see in that setting in Red Rocks than Manchester Orchestra. I ponied up big time, and I bought 4th row tickets for me and my friend and I, and I had the greatest time. My friend had an okay time. He's not as big a music fan as I am, but he lives in Colorado, so I dragged him with me, and we just, what a show, what a band. I can't wait to see what they do next. They are just on fire, and I hope it never ends. So
my journey with Manchester Orchestra is when I first heard, I don't remember which song it was off of Mean Everything to, I always mix up, it's Mean Everything
to Nothing.
To Nothing.
It was either I Got Friends or Shake It Out.
It was I Got Friends. When I heard that song, I was absolutely blown away. Went out, bought the album, listened to it nonstop. I was absolutely in love with that album. And to be honest with you, like...
Do you want to know how long ago that was? they announced that they were recording that album on MySpace.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was a long time ago. And this is what's funny about them, because my love for them at that time feels like an entirely other era. I saw them and Cage the Elephant opened for the Toadies, I think,
Wow.
at Newport. Was it the Toadies? Who did they? I cannot even remember who the headliner was anymore. But
I saw them open for Brand New.
oh, okay, nice. Yeah, but it wasn't Brand New. I'm pretty sure it was the Toadies, but anyways, doesn't matter. They were absolutely incredible live, but at that point, like, nobody was really there for them, and so it was a weird dynamic with the crowd. The crowd was very much not into them. I was probably more into it, I think, than most of the people in
Yeah.
the crowd. But anyways, so then when they put out Simple Math, it was pretty good for me, but it was a very different album, and I don't think I was ready to move on from that. So, like, at that point in
No.
my life, I wanted them to just keep doing what they were doing. And then they really lost me with Cope and Hope.
Cope.
That they lost me there. I totally fell out of that
Those
band.
records they're probably better than you remember.
I'm sure they are.
But they were like a record scratch.
But
they really were.
So I sort of lost touch with them completely, and they were not on my radar. What was after those? I'm trying to remember now what album.
Well, then it went straight into A Black Mile of the Surface.
Oh, that's, yeah. So that album, which I now absolutely love, I didn't even listen to it. I don't even recall, like, knowing that it was a thing or whatever. And so when Million Masks of God came out, and I think you started, like, really talking pretty highly of it, I went back and listened to it, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. So I fell in love with that album. So I was kind of getting back into them, and I went and saw them with you here in Columbus. We saw Manchester Orchestra, and I remember expecting, like, a half full venue. Like, I did not realize how big they had gotten. And then when I saw this show, like, it was so polished and professional, like, just a phenomenal live band. I was blown away by them, and they were just
the
it
chemistry
was not the same
between
band
the
that I saw
members,
however many years ago, eons ago.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, like, I since went back. I absolutely love Black Mile to the Surface now. Like, I listened to it a ton since then. I'm sort of back in on Manchester Orchestra. They got me back hooked again. So I don't have many bands where I have that kind of a journey where I'm, like, really into them, completely fall off of them, and then come all the way back around on them. So,
well, I kind of feel like that was my journey with Death Cab for Cutie as well. Like, they really did kind of lose me, and I've gone back and I've enjoyed Codes and Keys and some of those other records a lot more in hindsight.
Yeah.
But it took a little while, and for them, they kind of won me back, and their live show won me back. The other cool thing, I keep talking about taking my kids to shows. So the 10th anniversary show for Mean Everything to Nothing is one that I took my younger son to, and that was the first time I ever saw Foxing. Foxing opened up that show. And so Manchester Orchestra is another band where I'm following the tentacles, right?
Yeah.
I'm going beyond just that band, and I'm going and I'm listening to the things that they've been involved with and their friends.
If Foxing could capture,
which is so cool.
If they could capture their live show on record, they would be so much higher in my list of bands that I love. Like, their records don't quite do it for me the same way, but seeing them live, unbelievable live band. Foxing, just unbelievable. So that's our list.
So let's start talking about some honorable mentions.
Sure.
I want to go first on this one.
Ahead.
So an ultra personal honorable mention for me is a local band, and I didn't include them because I feel like local bands to you, this was a local band to me, fill a different gap. You know, you can have a relationship with a local band that you can't have with one of these national bands. And my friends and I, in that same time period where we were in love with Acid Bath and all those other bands, and I was in love with Tool at the time as well. But there's a band from Western PA, kind of somewhere Western PA near Youngstown, called Coin Monster,
Hmm.
and it's a three-piece band, very, very progressive, kind of heavy rock. Some of the most unbelievable musicianship you'll ever find in your entire life. It's unbelievable to me to this day that they didn't kind of make it ginormous. You know, they had a couple songs that ended up on TV shows and different things. They were on a very small label. They did 4 or 5 albums. There was a period of time where I was seeing them at least once a month, if not 2 or 3 times a month. And I knew every word to every song. I knew every jump in time signature. I knew every change in every song. And I saw them more times than any band I've ever seen in my entire life. And it's an entire era. I used to, even when I started at Boston University, I hate Halloween. I've always hated Halloween since the age of 12. I hated Halloween. I don't like to dress up. I don't care about candy. None of it matters. So when Halloween would roll around at Boston University, I had a car by sophomore year. I would drive 10 hours. I would leave Friday after classes or Thursday after classes, whenever I was done. I would drive 10 hours home to Cleveland. I would stay with my parents. Then I would drive to Youngstown to see the Coin Monster Halloween show. I would drive home after the show with no sleep at all. I would sleep back at my parents' house. And then on Sunday, I would drive 10 hours back to Boston. But I did that
Jeez.
2 or 3 years in a row, where I drove 20 plus hours just to be at Coin Monster shows, because I would rather be there than at a Halloween party in Boston.
Wow. That's awesome.
But they didn't crack my top 5 because Coin Monster felt oddly just too specific.
Very esoteric pick.
Yeah.
Well, my honorable mention is not esoteric. This was probably the hardest band for me to leave off my list. I don't know. Them and Tool, they're both pretty hard to leave off, but it's Oasis.
I thought you were going to say Radiohead.
So no, Radiohead is never quite, as much as I love Radiohead, they never
had the belt.
Had the belt. But Oasis, man. So, and this is it's kind of funny because when I don't know what year this was, but when Everclear's Santa Monica was on the radio, I didn't know who they were. I kept hearing it on the radio, but the DJ would never say who it was. And one time I thought that they said it was Oasis Supersonic. That's what I, but it must have been like the song before it or after it. I don't know. So I was like, oh, that's
so Wikipedia says December 1995.
Okay, yeah, so that timing fits then. So I went out and bought Oasis's album, Definitely Maybe, thinking I was because I wanted Santa Monica. So I hit play. I might have even gone straight to Supersonic, and immediately it was clear. I was like, oh crap! Like this isn't the song I thought it was, And then like the intro to Supersonic hits, and then as soon as I felt the pure attitude of Liam Gallagher's delivery of the vocals on Supersonic, I was like, wait a second though, what do we have here? And so Definitely Maybe, to this day, one of my absolute favorite albums. I listen to that all the time. I absolutely fell in love with it. And what's funny is they were not that big at that point yet, like not in the States anyways.
No.
And it wasn't until Wonderwall that they really blew up here. And I think personally, Morning Glory is one of my least favorite Oasis albums, actually. Despite it having Wonderwall, which I do like, it's a good song. Champagne Supernova is incredible. Like, so it's got like the high notes, but
Champagne Supernova is one of the best alternative singles from the entire era.
Yeah, I mean, it's not much you can say about it. It's just amazing. So then they put out Be Here Now, and that was the album that solidified them as one of my all-time favorite bands. And it's funny because most people hate that album. I mean, they were killed for that album when it came out because, again, mind you, this is on the backs of Champagne Supernova, Wonderwall, like People Wanted Morning Glory Part 2. And they put out this album that is just full of like 7-minute long songs, like 6-minute songs that could have been 3-minute songs. Like this album breathes in such a like expansive way that everybody hates, but I love it. And I don't know why. I can't explain it. I can't justify it. I can't sit here and tell you it's a universally great album that everybody should listen to. But for me, it's so personal to me, and I love that album. And so I never jumped off.
I have my own version of that record, by the way. So like, and I'm not in love with Arcade Fire.
Yeah.
But I thought Neon Bible was their best record
Yes.
by a long shot.
Yes.
And for everybody else, it's not Neon Bible.
Correct. But man, I
picked the wrong one according to everybody else.
It's the only Arcade Fire album I liked at all. I dislike the rest of their catalog. So that, but anyways, yeah. So for me, I never jumped off the Oasis train. If to this day, if the Gallagher brothers, who just get over their differences, if they put out a new album, I'd be first in line to pre-order it. Like I am all in on Oasis and the Gallagher brothers together. Separately, I've listened to their solo stuff. It's fine. Their dynamic just works together. When you strip out the like sophisticated, like the sophisticated songs that Noel puts together, and then you have this just snotty, sneering attitude of Liam on top of it. It just works in a way that when you strip those two parts away from each other, it's just fine. So,
well, and I think I saw it's probably Noel Gallagher's band opened up for Smashing Pumpkins.
Yeah, it was
once upon a time.
Noel's. It's probably High Flying Birds, most likely.
Yeah, and it was really fun to hear those Oasis songs.
They'll both play Oasis songs live, but they need to just get over it. Just reunite. My goodness, make some
someday
money.
the check will be big enough. They'll do it.
But I don't know.
Well, and I guess one of them went through a divorce, and maybe there was a problem with.
Yeah.
So that's what got Guns N' Roses back together when Slash finally got a divorce.
That's true.
He and Axl made up and got back together. So yeah. All right. Well, we went on a long time, but man, I had a blast.
Yeah, this is
I love going back and forth.
Yeah, I love I like the topic. I like framing it with the idea of the belt. Kudos to Pearl Jam for having the belt for so many years, man. Like what a run for that band.
So and we've never given you guys any instructions from listening to this, but we have this out on YouTube. We've got all the social channels. Even if you're not going to interact with us there a lot, just go follow them, give them a like, try and share this with a friend. We're trying to grow this thing. We're going to keep doing it, even if we only end up with the number of listeners we end up with.
We talk music nonstop all the time anyway, so why not record it?
It's more fun if we could do it together.
That's right. So.
All right. So thanks so much for listening, everybody. We will talk to you next time. It's been the Album of Record podcast.